All right, let's talk about chapter 4, and this is going to be our cell structure. So we're going to talk about these things. So we'll talk about the 4 things that all cells have. They have DNA, cytoplasm, plasma membranes, which is a whole chapter talking about them, and ribosomes. We're going to talk about prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are found in the domains of archaea and bacteria. There's some things that separate them. One of the factors that are different between archaea and bacteria are the components of the cell wall. But the major thing that keeps prokaryotes and eukaryotes, what separates them is the fact that prokaryotes do not have a nucleus. These are the older cells. They're kind of the first forms of life. Eukaryotic cells came later, and they are the ones that developed a nucleus where we keep the DNA safe, surrounded by a nuclear envelope, which actually turns out to be 2 phospholipid bilayers. Eukaryotic cells also have mitochondria and chloroplasts, and then they also have this thing called the endomembrane system, which is a series of organelles that are involved in the transport of substances throughout the cell, into the cell, out of the cell, and are all bound by a phospholipid bilayer or multiple in some cases. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about the cell theory, and then we'll look at the structure and the functional similarities. So we'll talk a little more detail about those 4 things, and we'll have another video that talks about cell size. So we talked the details about cell theory back in chapter 1, but let's just do a little refresh for us. There's 3 elements of cell theory. First of all, that all organisms are made of 1 or more cells. Our single cellular organisms are all the prokaryotes, and then some eukaryotes. Multicellular organisms can only be eukaryotes. The second thing that cell theory states is that cells are the basic units of life, so we can't take these organelles out of a cell and have them still function. They have to be involved in that cell, right? That's the fundamental unit of life. And then the last thing, the third thing, is that all cells come from pre-existing cells. And then back in chapter 1, we talked about how the experiments of Franciscus Redi and Louis Pasteur debunked the idea of spontaneous generation, where cells just arise out of nothing. All right, so let's talk about those 4 structural components that all cells, whether you're a prokaryote, whether you're a eukaryote, whether you're an animal cell or a fungal cell or a protist or whatever, all cells have these 4 things. So all cells are going to have DNA that's either located in the nucleoid region in the case of prokaryotes. It's just this kind of bunched up bit of DNA in the middle of the cell. The nucleoid region does not have a membrane-bound structure around protecting the DNA. It's just floating around in the cell juice. In eukaryotes, that DNA is protected by that nucleus, which is, again, 2 phospholipid bilayers. Okay, the cytoplasm is the cell juice that is the interior. So it's all the gooey bits that are inside of that plasma membrane. All of the organelles are floating around in there, all of the nutrients. So if you think of the consistency of like aloe vera gel, that's kind of the consistency of the cytoplasm because of all those dissolved nutrients and proteins and all the stuff that cells need to be alive. Ribosomes are small organelles that are not membrane bound. They are the protein producers of the cell. We'll talk a lot about the structure and the function of ribosomes later on in the semester. So for right now, we'll just know that these are the protein makers. And then we just spent a lot of time talking about the plasma membrane, so I'm not going to do that anymore.